All right, so today we're taking a deep dive into clairvoyance.
Ooh, getting into some psychic stuff, huh?
That's right, we're using clairvoyance, a practical guide, as our main source here.
Okay, and what's the plan for this deep dive?
Well, have you ever just felt like you knew something was going to happen before it did? Or walked into a place and felt some strange energy?
Yeah, I think most people have felt something like that at least once or twice.
Exactly. So we're going to explore those kinds of experiences through the lens of clairvoyance. But just a heads up,
Hmm.
while our source presents it as a real thing, a real ability, the scientific evidence to back it up is still, shall we say, debated.
Makes sense. So starting with the basics, what exactly is clairvoyance, according to the book?
Well, it's more than just seeing ghosts or predicting the future.
Oh, I bet a lot of people think that's all it is.
Right. But it's also about perceiving things like auras, those energy fields around people, even having premonitory dreams.
So a whole spectrum of psychic stuff.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is, the source says that everyone, and I mean everyone, has the potential to develop these abilities.
Wait, so they're saying we're all latent psychics?
So that's what the book argues. It says
Yeah.
it's like an innate human ability that's just kind of dormant, suppressed by our modern reliance on logic and the five senses.
Interesting. But they have to have some basis for this claim, right?
Oh, yeah. They give some pretty wild examples, like someone being able to describe the contents of a sealed letter or the layout of a room they've never been in.
Whoa, hold on. Are they talking about remote viewing?
They don't explicitly call it that, but yeah, it sounds pretty similar.
Okay, now that I've got to hear more about.
They even talk about people sensing like spiritual entities in historically significant places.
Okay, now we're getting into spooky territory.
Right, but that's where things start to get a little fuzzy, at least for me.
Fuzzy how?
Well, how much of this is real? Where's the science to back up these claims? I bet there are a lot of skeptics out there rolling their eyes right now.
Yeah, probably. It's easy to dismiss this stuff as hocus pocus without looking into it.
So that's what I'm wondering. Where does science stand on clairvoyance?
That's a tricky one. While our source treats it as a given, the scientific community as a whole, well, they're not exactly convinced.
So they're basically saying, show me the proof.
Pretty much. They want hard evidence, replicable experiments, all that good stuff.
And that's the problem, right? There haven't been any studies that definitively prove these abilities exist.
Exactly. That's one of the biggest challenges for proponents of clairvoyance.
So what are the skeptics saying? Why are they so doubtful?
Well, they have a few points. One big criticism is that a lot of the research in this field has some methodological flaws.
What kind of flaws?
Things like not controlling for those unconscious cues we talked about earlier. Like, even a subtle nod from the researcher can influence a participant's response.
So it's like the researcher's expectations might be skewing the results.
Exactly. And skeptics also argue that confirmation bias plays a role.
Meaning, people who already believe in clairvoyance are more likely to interpret things as proof, even if there's a simpler explanation.
That's the idea. Plus, let's not forget the whole issue of fraud. There have been cases where so-called psychics were just using trickery to make it seem like they had powers.
Yikes. So that definitely adds fuel to the skeptic's fire. But even with all that, it's hard to ignore the fact that people have been talking about clairvoyance for centuries across different cultures and religions.
Yeah, that's true. From ancient shamans having visions to the Oracle of Delphi making prophecies, this stuff has been around for a long time.
And even today, people consult tarot readers and mediums hoping for guidance.
Right. There's something about this idea, this connection to something beyond the material world that keeps fascinating us.
So even if we're not sure about the science, it's a part of the human experience that's worth exploring.
Definitely. It makes us question our assumptions about reality and consider the possibility that there might be more to the world than we currently understand.
Okay, so we've got this tension, right? Our source is all about clairvoyance being a real thing, while the scientific community isn't fully on board.
Right.
But let's say, for a moment, that there's something to this. How would someone even go about developing these abilities? Does the book offer any guidance?
It does. Actually, a good chunk of the book is dedicated to practical techniques and exercises.
Okay, so it's not just theory. They give you actual tools to try.
Right, and it emphasizes things like meditation and visualization as key practices.
So basically training your mind to be more receptive to those subtle psychic signals.
Exactly. It's like learning a new skill. Takes practice, dedication.
I'm intrigued. What are some of the specific techniques they recommend?
Well, meditation is a big one. It's about quieting the mind, becoming more aware of your thoughts and feelings.
Creating that space for inner stillness, right?
Yes. And once you've got that down, they suggest adding visualization techniques.
Okay, so like picturing things in your mind.
Yeah, but they have a whole range of exercises. From simple stuff like imagining a color or object to more complex scenarios like creating a clairvoyant laboratory in your mind.
A clairvoyant laboratory. That sounds kind of cool. What is that exactly?
It's basically a mental space, a safe space where you can practice receiving and interpreting those intuitive insights.
So like a mental training ground for your psychic abilities.
Exactly. They even suggest using it to practice psychometry,
Psychometry, that thing where you hold an object and get impressions from it.
That's the one. It's a way to test your sensitivity to psychic energies.
Okay, so we've got meditation, visualization, psychometry. What else is in their toolbox?
Well, they talk about something called aura visualization, which is...
Wait, actually seeing auras,
Yeah.
not just imagining them.
Yep, seeing them. They claim that with enough practice, you can train your perception to see those energy fields around people.
So those colorful halos you sometimes see in pictures, those are real.
That's what the book says. And they give exercises for training your sensitivity to these energies.
Like, how do you even start doing that? Do you just stare at people?
Well, they recommend starting by observing people in well-lit environments and paying attention to any subtle colors or patterns you perceive around their body.
I'm a little skeptical, but I'd be willing to give it a try. What else do they suggest?
They talk about the importance of connecting with your spirit guides.
Spirit guides. Okay, now we're getting into some deep spiritual territory.
Yeah, it's a whole other level. The book describes them as these benevolent beings who offer guidance and support on your spiritual journey.
So like your own personal team of spiritual advisors. How do you even find these spirit guides?
Well, the source emphasizes setting intentions, paying attention to signs and synchronicities, and trusting your intuition.
So like if I keep seeing a certain symbol over and over, that could be a sign from my guide.
It could be. Or it could be a coincidence. It's all about learning to discern those intuitive nudges from your guides.
This is getting pretty wild.
Yeah.
But I have to ask, is there any scientific evidence for these spirit guides?
Well, like with a lot of clairvoyance stuff, the scientific proof is kind of lacking. But belief in spirit guides is pretty common across different cultures and spiritual traditions.
So it's another one of those things that science hasn't quite caught up with yet, but that resonates deeply with a lot of people.
Exactly. It speaks to that human desire for connection and guidance, especially when facing life's challenges.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground already. We've got the basics of what clairvoyance is, the scientific debate surrounding it, and some of the techniques for developing these abilities.
Right, and it seems like our exploration of clairvoyance is just getting started.
It is. But before we go any further, I think we need to take a closer look at the science, or lack thereof, behind these claims. Because as intriguing as all this is, it's important to understand where the scientific community stands and what the evidence actually tells us.
I agree. Let's dive into the science and see how it aligns with the claims made in our source.
All right, so let's get into the nitty-gritty of the science, or lack thereof, when it comes to clairvoyance.
Okay, sounds good.
What are some of the main challenges researchers face when trying to study these abilities in a scientific way?
Well, one of the biggest hurdles is how subjective these experiences are, Clairvoyance often involves these subtle perceptions and feelings that are really hard to measure objectively.
So it's not like measuring your heart rate or brain waves, where you have clear physical data.
Exactly. There's no easily identifiable physical correlate for those psychic phenomena.
So designing experiments that can truly test these abilities without bias becomes really tricky.
You got it. It's tough to separate the real deal from just random chance or wishful thinking.
And that's where those unconscious cues we talked about earlier become a real problem, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Even if a researcher is super careful, they might unintentionally influence the participants through subtle body language or tone of voice.
It's almost like trying to observe a tiny particle without disturbing it. The act of observation itself might change what you're trying to measure.
That's a great analogy. And that's why skeptics are so quick to point out that many studies claiming to prove clairvoyance might not have controlled for those variables well enough.
So their argument is that the results could have multiple interpretations. It's not necessarily proof of actual psychic abilities.
Exactly. And there's also the whole issue of replicability, which is crucial in science.
Right. You need to be able to repeat an experiment and get consistent results for it to be considered reliable evidence.
Yep, and that's been a problem with some clairvoyance studies. Some get positive results, others don't. It's inconsistent.
Okay, so there are definitely some methodological issues. But surely there must have been some research that got past these problems and produced some compelling evidence, right?
Well, there have been some interesting studies for sure. Our source actually mentions the research on a remote viewing done at the Stanford Research Institute back in the 70s and 80s.
Oh, yeah, I remember reading about that. They had people try to describe places or objects they couldn't physically see.
That's the one. And some of the early findings were pretty impressive, like participants giving really accurate descriptions that seemed to go beyond just chance.
So why didn't those studies convince everyone that remote viewing was real?
Well, like I said, replicability is key. And later studies, some done by researchers named Marks and Kamen, they had different results.
What were the results?
They argued that the success in those early studies could be attributed to things like, you guessed it, unconscious cues.
So those subtle hints from the researchers might have actually been guiding the participants, even if unintentionally.
Yep. When Marks and Kamen repeated the experiments but controlled for those cues, the psychic effects vanished.
Okay, so that kind of casts a shadow of doubt on those early
Uh,
findings. But what about other research on clairvoyance? Are there any studies that have held up under scrutiny?
There have been some that show statistically significant results, suggesting something more than just random chance might be at work. But yeah, a lot of those studies also get criticized for methodological issues, or they haven't been replicated consistently.
So it's a mixed bag, some intriguing hints, but no definitive proof that satisfies everyone.
Exactly. And that's why the debate continues. People who support clairvoyance say we just don't have the right tools yet to study these subtle phenomena properly.
And the skeptics are basically saying, show me the extraordinary evidence.
Yep, it's a classic scientific standoff.
Okay, so the science is inconclusive at best. But that still leaves us with a big question. Why do so many people believe in clairvoyance, even without hard proof? Why do these ideas stick around?
You know, I think it speaks to this deep human need to make sense of the world around us, to find meaning beyond just the physical stuff.
Like, people have always been drawn to the mysterious and the unknown.
Exactly. A lot of people have had experiences that seem to defy logical explanation. A dream that comes true or a gut feeling that turns out to be right.
Yeah, those moments of synchronicity where it's like, whoa, maybe there's something more going on here.
Right. Those experiences, even if they're just anecdotal, can be really powerful and lead people to believe in something bigger than what we can see and touch.
Okay, I get that. But our source also talks about some pretty out there concepts like astral bodies and the Akashic records. How do those fit into this?
Those definitely get into more esoteric territory, and mainstream science isn't really on board with them yet. But they do offer a framework for understanding clairvoyance and its potential implications.
Okay, break it down for me. What's an astral body supposed to be?
Basically, it's this subtle energy body that exists alongside our physical form. It's like a vehicle for consciousness, and it can travel beyond the limits of space and time.
So our spiritual twin going on adventures in other dimensions.
That's the gist. The book says clairvoyants can project their consciousness through their astral bodies, allowing them to perceive events in distant locations or even across time.
Whoa, that's mind-bending. And what about those Akashic records? That sounds intense.
Yeah, it's basically like this cosmic library that holds a record of everything that has ever happened, is happening, and will happen. It's like a universal history book.
And clairvoyants can access this library, like tap into all that information.
That's what the source claims. It says with practice, anyone can learn to access these records and gain insights into the past, present, and even the future.
Okay, even for me, that's getting a bit hard to swallow. But let's say these records DO exist. Wouldn't that create some paradoxes? Like, if we could all see the future, wouldn't that change it, making the future unreliable?
That's a really good point. It's a question philosophers and physicists have been debating for ages, especially when it comes to time travel and causality. Our source doesn't go too deep into those philosophical weeds, but it does say that time and how the past, present, and future connect is way more complex than we usually think.
Okay, fair enough. So we've got these intriguing, if speculative, ideas about astral bodies and Akashic records. But let's get back to those practical techniques for developing clairvoyance that we were discussing. What other exercises does the book recommend?
Well, besides meditation, visualization, and aura stuff, they also talk a lot about paying attention to our dreams.
These dreams are like messages from our subconscious, right?
Exactly. The book says dreams can give us a lot of intuitive information, often through symbols that represent our fears, desires, and unresolved issues. It even suggests keeping a dream journal to track those symbols and look for recurring themes.
So those weird, nonsensical dreams might actually be trying to tell me something.
They might. Even the most bizarre dream could have hidden meaning, according to the source.
Okay, I'm definitely going to start paying more attention to my dreams now. What else do they recommend?
They talk about practicing what they call open-eyed clairvoyance in your daily life, not just during those structured exercises.
Open-eyed clairvoyance. So like walking around trying to see everyone's auras.
Haha, not quite. It's more about being super aware and paying attention to those subtle, intuitive nudges you get throughout the day.
Like those gut feelings or hunches we often ignore.
Exactly. They say those are often trying to guide us, offering insights or warnings, but we miss them if we're not paying attention. They also emphasize learning to discern between those helpful intuitions and just our anxieties or wishful thinking.
So it's about trusting your gut, but also being discerning about those feelings.
Right. It's about developing your inner compass.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about situations where you need more specific guidance? Does the source offer any advice on how to seek answers beyond your own intuition?
They do. Actually, they have a whole chapter on divination tools and techniques.
Divination tools,
Right.
like tarot cards and crystal balls.
Yep, all that good stuff. But they present those tools not as magical objects in themselves, but as ways to focus your intuition and access a deeper level of knowing.
So it's not the tool itself, but how you use it to connect with your inner wisdom.
That's the key. They stress that those tools work best when combined with meditation, visualization, and a genuine desire to connect with your intuition and the spiritual realm.
Okay, I'm seeing a recurring theme here. Whether it's meditation, visualization, dream analysis, or those divination tools, it all comes back to cultivating that inner awareness and connecting with something beyond the material world.
You got it. And I think that's the heart of what our source is trying to say. It's not about gaining superpowers or becoming a psychic superstar. It's about rediscovering that innate intuitive ability within all of us and using it to live with more clarity and purpose.
Beautifully put. This deep dive has been quite a journey so far. It's definitely challenged my assumptions about reality and what our minds are capable of. But before we wrap up, let's go back to something we touched on earlier. The impact clairvoyance could have on society if it were real and widespread.
Ah, yes. That's where it gets really interesting. Our source explores some pretty wild scenarios about how clairvoyance could change everything from education and healthcare to politics and even our personal relationships.
Okay, I'm ready for some mind-blowing possibilities. How would a world where everyone had some degree of clairvoyance be different from our world?
Well, imagine teachers who could intuitively understand each student's unique learning style and tailor their teaching methods to help them thrive.
So no more struggling to keep up or feeling lost in a crowded classroom. Everyone could learn at their own pace and in a way that works for them. That'd be amazing.
It would. And think about healthcare. Doctors could intuitively sense the root cause of an illness and offer more effective treatments, maybe even preventing diseases before they even show up.
No more guessing games with diagnoses or treatments. Healthcare would be truly personalized.
Exactly. And think about our legal system. Jurors could know for sure if someone was guilty or innocent.
Wow, no more wrongful convictions. Talk about a game changer.
Right. But it does bring up some ethical questions, doesn't it?
Yeah, for sure. If everyone could read each other's minds, privacy would be gone. And could we even handle that level of transparency?
Good points. And the source does address that. It stresses the need for ethics and responsibility when using these abilities.
So it's not just about having the power, but using it wisely.
Right. It's a gift and a responsibility.
Okay, so we've talked about history, personal growth, communication, even the legal system. But what about the impact on science?
The source imagines a future where intuition and science are partners. They say scientists could use clairvoyance to guide their research, leading to breakthroughs in medicine, physics, even consciousness studies.
So intuition and logic working together, that's a pretty radical idea.
It is. It makes you wonder if some of history's greatest scientific discoveries were actually sparked by those flashes of intuition that couldn't be explained by conventional science.
Interesting thought. Okay, so if clairvoyance has this potential to change so much about our lives, why isn't everyone trying to develop these abilities?
Well, as we've discussed, there's still a lot of debate about whether these claims are valid. The scientific community isn't convinced, and many people are skeptical, which is understandable. And even for those open to the possibility, developing these abilities takes real effort and dedication.
And not a quick fix, it's a journey.
Exactly. But for those who are drawn to it, the rewards could be huge. The source says clairvoyance can lead to a deeper understanding of ourselves, the world, and our place in it all. It can help us live more authentically, trust our intuition, and face life's challenges with more clarity and purpose.
That's a powerful message. This deep dive has been eye-opening, to say the least. I'm definitely going to try some of those visualization exercises, maybe even dust off those old tarot cards I have lying around.
That's the spirit. And remember, even if you're skeptical, there's always something to gain from opening your mind to new possibilities and questioning what we think we know about reality.
Well said. And on that note, it's time to wrap up this deep dive into clairvoyance. We've explored a lot, from practical techniques to philosophical implications. Hopefully our listeners are leaving with a sense of wonder and some healthy skepticism, ready to embark on their own journeys of exploration.
Indeed. And maybe most importantly, a renewed appreciation for the mysteries that still lie beyond our current understanding.
Okay, so we've talked about what clairvoyance is and some techniques for developing it. But I'm curious, what's the big deal? Like, if it really is real, how does it change things?
Well, that's where it gets really interesting. You see, our source suggests that if clairvoyance is legit, it shakes up everything, from science and history to how we talk to each other every day.
Okay, I'm all ears. Let's start with history. How does clairvoyance rewrite the history books?
Well, imagine historians could actually experience past events instead of just reading about them. Our source claims that by tapping into the Akashic records, that universal knowledge archive, we could have a direct window into the past. We'd understand those historical figures, their motivations, see how complex those events really were, and maybe even learn from their mistakes.
Wow. So history wouldn't just be about dates and battles anymore. It'd be about connecting with the human experience across time.
Exactly. And think about personal growth, too. Imagine accessing your past lives, understanding those karmic patterns, and really getting insight into your soul's journey.
Okay, that's getting pretty deep. But let's bring it back down to earth for a sec. How would clairvoyance change our everyday lives?
Well, think about how we communicate. If we could actually perceive each other's true thoughts and feelings, forget those misunderstandings and hidden agendas, no more passive-aggressive emails.
Haha, no kidding. That'd be a game changer, but also kind of intense, right?
It would. And that's why the source really emphasizes ethics and responsibility. Clairvoyance, like any tool, can be used in good ways or bad. It's about using it for compassion and understanding, not manipulation.
So having the power isn't enough. You gotta have the wisdom to use it right.
You got it. It's a gift, but it comes with responsibility.
Okay, so we've touched on history, personal growth, communication. What about science? How would clairvoyance shake things up in the scientific world?
Well, our source envisions a future where intuition and science work together. They say scientists could actually use clairvoyance to guide their research. That could lead to incredible breakthroughs in medicine, physics, even consciousness studies.
Wow, so instead of just logic and experiments, we'd have intuitive insights too. That's a whole new way of doing science.
It is, and it kind of makes you wonder, maybe some of the biggest scientific discoveries throughout history, maybe those were sparked by moments of intuition that couldn't be explained at the time.
That's a fascinating thought. Okay, so if clairvoyance has the potential to transform so much, why isn't everyone trying to develop these abilities?
Well, we got to remember, there's still a lot of debate about whether these claims are true. The scientific community isn't quite on board, and a lot of folks are naturally skeptical, which is totally fair. And even if you're open to it, developing these abilities, it takes time, effort, dedication. It's not a quick fix, It's a real journey.
So not for the casual dabbler.
Right. But for those willing to put in the work, the source suggests the rewards are pretty awesome. It can lead to a deeper understanding of yourself, the world, your place in it all, living more authentically, trusting your gut, and navigating those tough times with more clarity.
Wow, that's powerful stuff. This deep dive has really opened my eyes. I'm definitely going to try some of those visualization exercises, maybe even dust off that old tarot deck I have tucked away. Who knows what I might discover, right?
That's the spirit. Even if you approach it with a healthy dose of skepticism, there's always something to be gained from opening your mind, challenging your assumptions, and considering that maybe, just maybe, there's more to reality than we currently understand.
Well said. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive into the world of clairvoyance. We've explored a lot, from practical techniques to those big what-if questions. Hopefully our listeners are leaving with a sense of wonder, a bit of healthy skepticism, and a desire to explore these ideas for themselves. Who knows what they might uncover along the way.
Absolutely. And maybe most importantly, a renewed appreciation for those mysteries that still lie beyond our current understanding. There's always more to discover.